It's official. On December 14th, 2023, Naughty Dog announced the cancellation of their highly anticipated standalone multiplayer game taking place in the Last of Us universe. This is the message they hosted on their website. We realize that many of you have been anticipating news around the project that we've been calling The Last of Us Online. There's no easy way to say this. We've made the incredibly difficult decision to stop development on that game. We know this news will be tough for many, especially our dedicated The Last of Us factions community, who have been following our multiplayer ambitions ardently. We're equally crushed at the studio, as we were looking forward to putting it in your hands. We wanted to share with you some of the background of how we came to this decision. The multiplayer team has been in pre-production with this game since we were working on The Last of Us Part 2, crafting an experience we felt was unique and had tremendous potential. As the multiplayer team iterated on their concept for The Last of Us Online during this time, their vision crystallized, the gameplay got more refined and satisfying, and we were enthusiastic about the direction in which we were headed. In ramping up to full production, the massive scope of our ambition became clear. To release and support The Last of Us Online, we'd have to put all our studio resources behind supporting post-launch content for years to come, severely impacting development on future single-player games. So we had two paths in front of us: to become a solely live service game studio, or continue to focus on single-player narrative games that have defined Naughty Dog's heritage. We are immensely proud of everyone at the studio that touched the project. The learnings and investments in technology from this game will carry into how we develop our projects and will be invaluable in the direction we are headed as a studio. We have more than one ambitious, brand new single-player game that we're working on here at Naughty Dog, and we cannot wait to share more about what comes next when we're ready. Until then, we're incredibly thankful to our community for your support throughout the years. To some, this news comes as a terrible heartbreak. Many fans, like myself, were hopeful to have the opportunity to jump back into one of our favorite IPs, but this time with friends at our side. Others, however, have found a spark of hope in this announcement. Today we'll be talking over the reasons that may be, and recounting the long path which led to this melancholy moment. But before we begin, be sure to hit that like button, along with the bell, to subscribe for more Freakopolis content. It was a long journey from the beginnings of The Last of Us to its current state. In 2009, Naughty Dog had just finished producing Drake's Fortune 2, cementing their position as one of Sony Entertainment's favored children for pretty much all time to come. Following this release, creative director Neil Druckmann had a vision for a new post-apocalyptic IP, The Last of Us. The game came out in 2011, and I still have some text saved from when I first got my hands on it. I was messaging a friend in the middle of the night as I experienced this visceral, heartbreaking story for the first time. One text stands out in particular. Sent at 1:34 a.m., I said, "Actually, I think this might be my favorite video game ever." I was not alone in that sentiment. Not at all. The Last of Us exploded onto the stage, infecting gamers worldwide with its gripping narrative and attention to detail. By selling 1.7 million copies in its first week, this new Naughty Dog production had taken its position as one of the definitive games of the PS3 era. It felt as though there was a constant buzz about The Last of Us. In one masterstroke, the writers had taken something as old and chewed up as zombie apocalypse and breathed new life into the whole of it. From the first minutes of gameplay to the gritty and brutal ending, this title set itself aside in a major way. In time, the IP would go on to expand into the realms of comic books and television, garnering millions of fans worldwide. With the release of multiple DLCs, remasters, remakes, and the sequel as well, it was quite clear that Naughty Dog was committed to this world and its stories. There was one piece of content which stood out amidst the others, however. The Factions mode of The Last of Us, a multiplayer component to a vastly single-player game. At the time, Naughty Dog were certainly not known for their multiplayer features. While Drake's Fortune had team deathmatch and the like, it was a relatively shallow experience. Factions introduced something with a little more meat on its bones. There was risk to every match, appropriate to the brutal reality of living in a world overrun with fungus zombies. There was satisfying progression and well-considered map layouts. Some players stayed committed to this game mode for years. What I'm trying to say is, ultimately, some people really loved the Factions mode. So, having accrued a lot more experience at developing on the multiplayer end of things, it seemed natural that the developers at Naughty Dog would aspire to release a fully online title. So why all the trouble along the way? Well, following The Last of Us 1's release, the concept of games as a service, or GaaS, really began to come into its own. Those who succeeded at making a lasting GaaS were making absolute bank. Seriously, one successful games as a service release, and you can see profits comparable to 10 single-player games. These days, that's the equivalent of maybe 50 or 60 years worth of dev time. Any AAA studio with a brain would want a slice of that pie. As the PS4 era went on, and The Last of Us Part 2 was in development, Naughty Dog undoubtedly saw the next evolution of their IP. Post-Factions, they had an in-house multiplayer team at that point. This next rendition of The Last of Us multiplayer was anticipated to grow and grow, ultimately becoming so much more than a simple add-on or optional side content. But making a games as a service is no easy feat in the first place. More than a few crash and burn. Sometimes they take whole companies down with them. It's a huge risk to delve into a gaming space which is constantly in flux after all. The nature of these online games and their player base change and evolve each year, and the blistering pace of new content releases and support for these titles make the games as a service pool difficult to even dip your toes into. And so, with undoubtedly high aspirations, Naughty Dog began their lengthy and ill-fated attempt at breaking into this space. Fans of The Last of Us were teased with this multiplayer future at E3 2018, and the concept was enticing to say the least. It's easy to picture that a world as detailed and dangerous as this one could be a whole lot of fun to explore side by side with a friend. A whole new original story was promised, with new characters and as of yet unseen locales within the United States. Some preliminary art was released, and speculation began that this game would take place in San Francisco. The hype machine was rolling. Most of us were content to wait for the time being, knowing that Naughty Dog's ambitions were not going to be rushed. Based on what we had been told and shown, this was going to be a big project. But years passed, and the gaming space continued to evolve. The PlayStation 5 released, and there was a distinct silence from one of Sony's premier first-party studios. Naughty Dog had seldom few updates on this project to spare. In time, rumblings began to indicate that the game was caught in a troubled development cycle. In July of 2022, Sony acquired Bungie, the developers of Destiny and Destiny 2. In this wild west of games as a service, Bungie had managed to claw themselves into a relatively stable position. One thing was clear to the execs at Sony. These folks had the expertise needed to run and maintain one of these multiplayer titles, mostly anyway. And they were likely brought on board with the express purpose of helping other first-party studios reach a similar point. Sony reportedly wanted to release a dozen or so games-as-a-service style titles before 2025, and The Last of Us Online was almost certainly counted amidst those unhatched eggs. The thing is, when Bungie experts visited Naughty Dog in May of 2023, the whole attitude towards the title seemed to shift. I don't know exactly what they found, or perhaps implied to be the issue, but I think an inkling of their conclusions can be seen in the cancellation message. More than likely, I believe Naughty Dog was informed by Bungie just how much dev power is devoted towards this kind of project post-release. Maintaining the content pipeline necessary for the consistent releases needed to satisfy a games-as-a-service type fanbase is really, really difficult. The resource cost was going to be massive. In order to commit enough to succeed, the entire company would be shaken at its core, and all hands would need to be placed on deck just in order to stay afloat. That meant sacrificing any chance at releasing new stories and IPs for the next decade or so. Naughty Dog came to realize that the cost to release this game would be exorbitantly high. A few months later, in early October, those anticipated the online release had their hopes dashed just a little bit more, as Naughty Dog suffered a wave of layoffs. Now, this is no unique thing in the industry. About 9,000 developers have seen this happen to themselves this year alone. Which is awful, of course. However, the indications seem to be that the development of The Last of Us Online had been put on ice. Prominent gaming journalists began to report that this was the case, yet there was no confirmation of the fact until just recently. Now, finally, we have seen the end of the tunnel, and, unfortunately, it's a bit of a brick wall. December's announcement marks the end of the hype machine for The Last of Us Online, but the talent at Naughty Dog didn't leave us without a bit of hope. The sad fact is, it's not uncommon that games go through development hell, only to never reach the gamers they were meant for. But there are 2 points in Naughty Dog's regretful announcement, which I think have brought fans a spark of joy. For one, those long years spent on this unfulfilled title will not be wasted, Advancements are being made all the time, which will make their next release all the better. From motion capture tech, to image upscaling, to the capabilities of their engine, there's a lot of work that I'm certain will be salvaged. Though this particular project might not see the light of day, its features and structures may very well be implemented in new ways we could never anticipate. And that's where the real hope lies, I think. One door closes and another opens, right? By choosing to turn away from the games as a service model and instead embrace the legacy and heritage of single-player games which have propelled Naughty Dog to the top of the pile, more fans than not are probably letting out a collective sigh of relief. As I had stated, these online games are terribly taxing on studios, to the point that they can be dragged down and placed at risk of closure because of the expense of the effort. The Last of Us Online had incredible promise, surely, but at the cost of a new fantasy or sci-fi IP from some of my favorite creatives, I don't think that price is worth it. Not at all. So now we look to the future. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered is on the horizon because of course it is. And I'll be picking that up in a heartbeat, because I love these games. I love the experiences Naughty Dog worked so hard to put together. Though I well realize it might just be good PR, there's something to be said about the willingness to forgo the obviously profitable in favor of the obviously passionate. And we'll see that passion in their next project, of that I have no doubt. Naughty Dog's mark on the PS5 generation is yet to come, but we know two comforting things for certain now. It will be single player, and it will be awesome. That's the legacy they're choosing to embrace. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll catch you next time.